I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Every morning, we awake to a world marvelously alive. Where do we encounter awe and wonder in this world? In animals and plants, in deserts, on mountains, in forests, ocean and sky, in history, art and science, in human striving and human kindness. Join us as we quest for the awe and wonder of knowing we are part of something infinitely larger than ourselves. Your host for this episode is Tenery Taylor.
The Taj Mahal may be the most famous monument to love. Millions have journeyed to India to see the shrine built by Emperor Shah Jahan in memory of his wife, Mumtaz Mahal. However, right in the heart of London, there's another monument to another devoted royal marriage. You may know Charing Cross. It's an ornately carved stone monument in the shape of a spire or tower. It marks a very busy tube or subway station of the same name. Nearly 55,000 people come through this tube station every day. But many, if not most of them, don't know that the construction of this stone tower above the station was a romantic gesture. It celebrates the love story of Edward I and his wife, Eleanor of Castile.
Well, it was definitely an arranged political marriage, and they were in their teens when it happened. But the great miracle is that they were totally in love, and they were a great team. They spent a lot of time together on campaign, traveling around the country. Eleanor didn't need to be there, but she wanted to be there. And it seems to me like they only spent time apart if they absolutely had to be apart.
Alice Loxton is a 29-year-old historian who has worked with the BBC, the National Trust, No. 10 Downing Street. She makes history cool and accessible, as her nearly 3 million social media followers confirm. Constant Wonder made a trip to London and met up with her at Charing Cross. Her latest book is Eleanor, a 200-mile walk in search of England's lost queen. Her book launch was in Poets' Corner at Westminster Abbey, and for the occasion, she wore a Jenny Packham gown. That's one of Kate Middleton's favorite designers. Mixing glamour with forgotten history is a recipe Alice has followed to connect millions, especially young people, to neglected ancient stories that are often hiding right in plain sight around England. Stories like Eleanor of Castile and King Edward I. In her best-selling book, Eleanor, Alice Loxton brings to life the story not just of Charing Cross, but of 11 more towers, or Eleanor crosses, built to commemorate this queen just after she died in 1290. The scale of Edward's devotion alone might be justification enough for us to bring you the story of the 12 Eleanor crosses. It's a fantastic love story. And it ends with this impressive memorializing of his emotion. Consider that this building project, it's not an attempt to win a young bride, but rather a flourish of praise for a lifelong companion. Having been married myself for almost the same length of time as Eleanor and Edward, 3.5 decades, I know what my spouse is going to say before he says it. In a glance, we can convey a story. So the scope of Edward's grief made sense to me, and it will to you too once we paint a picture of that relationship for you. All that aside, though, what Alice Loxton found gratifying about the Eleanor crosses, and what makes this a perfect story for Constant Wonder, is that people today are still connecting with Eleanor and still keeping the story alive. And not just historians. Everyday people in their 21st century lives have found inspiration in this 800-year-old love story. In this episode, you'll meet several of them. As Alice just mentioned, the marriage of Eleanor and Edward was a political one. She was from Castile, or the central part of modern-day Spain.
And it was this like very powerful kingdom. She also would have had this kind of glamorous upbringing in these Castilian palaces and castles, eating tropical fruits and pomegranates. And, you know, they had these amazing gardens. And that's something else she brings to England. She brings this love of gardening.
We always thought that was so British.
Yeah, yeah. Well, she brings these properties she's managing. She also brings in kind of fountains, gardens with particular fruits that are related to her childhood, and kind of much more planned gardens, so courtyard gardens, the kind of things that you still see in Spain today. And her family were very involved in, it was a time of a lot of fighting at that period. You know, the symbol of Castile is the castle. She was very involved in the world of campaigning. So it's no surprise, I think, when she grows up.
Meaning military campaigning.
Sure, yes, military campaigning. So when she grows up, she is quite extraordinary. She's traveling around Europe, she goes on crusades, she gives birth on crusades. We can't be sure, but it's thought that she had 16 children, or she gave birth 16 times.
Wow.
Only 6 of those survive. And so I think that's another story that often gets overlooked, especially with medieval women, is that for us, we'll look at the family tree and we'll say, oh, there's 6 lines. Those are her 6 children. But Eleanor, of course, would have looked at that family tree and think, hang on, all of those other children are not mentioned on there. All of that pain and that grief of losing all these 10 children, perhaps, 10 pregnancies. And she's on the road all the time. You know, so all this is happening. It's not in the comfort of a palace in London. It's perhaps while she's on crusade. She went through a lot of trauma, I think, in her own life. They went through civil war together. They went through becoming king and queen together, which is quite something, and having all those children and managing the wars of Wales and managing a country which had been on the brink of civil war. So they were a brilliant team.
Throughout this episode, we'll delve into the political and military strife that Alice Loxton has just made quick reference to. But let's stick with the Eleanor crosses and the Queen herself for now. First of all, these monuments are called crosses, but they're more like stone pillars, lavishly decorated Gothic monuments, carved with images of Eleanor and with symbols like scepters, reminding people of her royal lineage and her accomplishments.
It's often thought that the crosses were called crosses because they might have had a kind of Christian cross at the top, which doesn't stand anymore, or they were placed at crossroads, on those occasions. But, that's all up for grabs.
The top half of the 70-foot-tall Charing Cross contains 8 statues of Eleanor, each celebrating an aspect of the Queen's reign, her interests. Now, it must be clarified that Charing Cross, as it stands today, is actually a Victorian replica. The original monument, commissioned by Edward, was torn down by anti-royalists in the mid-1600s. They were led by Oliver Cromwell. Also, the original cross stood in what is now Trafalgar Square. It's about 200 meters away.
You can see on the right, Eleanor's holding what looks like to be a building of some sort. Eleanor was famous for managing buildings. She was an incredible businesswoman, and she would manage all of these estates around the country, really to make her kind of self-sufficient as a queen in her own right.
So she owned her own property?
Yeah, she was a big property owner. If she was alive today, she'd be like a dragon on Dragon's Den. Do you know that show in the US? Yeah.
Oh, Shark Tank, yes.
So if she was alive today, she might be one of the sharks on Shark Tank, that kind of thing. Because she was a really, really formidable and no-nonsense kind of woman. It's a very difficult position in this medieval period because we didn't have a queen pregnant, so a queen that rules in her own right, until Mary I, who's the daughter of Henry VIII. So this is much later. So we have this succession of women in the medieval period who are the queens to their husband, but not in their own right. And so they're in this kind of weird in-between place where they're trying to kind of establish themselves independently. So she gives herself independence, and she gives herself an independence that keeps other queens in good condition and good standing for years to come, and kind of bolsters that position as queen, I think.
Edward was quite busy, not just with crusading, but also trying to subdue Wales and Scotland. He and Eleanor actually leaned into the legend of King Arthur, turning to literature in their quest to put down rebellions in these areas.
They adored the tales of King Arthur, as did many people across Europe. But they especially kind of bought into those stories in that they often portrayed themselves as the new King Arthur, the new Guinevere. And that's a great romantic thing to do. You know, it's like kind of cosplaying, as you can see celebrities doing things like that sort of today. But there is also an interesting political angle here, because King Arthur was this great Welsh hero. And there was this story that Arthur would come back and he would return and he would save the Welsh, and perhaps he would be the one that would lead the uprising against the English, that sort of thing. And what Edward and Eleanor do in this incredible ceremony at Glastonbury Abbey is they claim to have discovered the bones of King Arthur, essentially. And, you know, we can't be sure whose they were, really, but they were kind of decided at the time that those were the bones of King Arthur that had been discovered. And so they have this great ceremony, incredibly elaborate, where they're all there. It must have been an amazing, amazing moment where they are reburying the bones. And I think it would have been very obvious to people that there was Guinevere and Arthur, and here was Edward and Eleanor, and they are essentially presenting themselves as the new Arthur and Guinevere. But equally, by burying the bones, they are saying that this hope that the Welsh might have, that King Arthur might return, is dead. It's consolidating their power.
If this is the first time you've heard of Eleanor, the story of Edward and his conquests in Wales and Scotland might still ring a bell for you. Edward was also known as Longshanks, made famous or infamous by the movie Braveheart. I want to take just a short detour from this love story, just to admit, really, that Edward may have been beloved by Eleanor, even respected by his own people, or many of them anyway, but that doesn't mean everyone thought he was a great guy. I think knowing that he could be fierce and unyielding in government and war makes his adoration for his wife all the more tender. Or maybe he just never did anything by halves. In the town of Conwy in Wales is a castle built by Edward just before Eleanor died. Next door to the castle is St. Mary's Church, where a few days before I caught up with Alice Loxton, I met John Hibbs, a retired British chemist and volunteer guide. He provided a not very flattering portrait of the king.
Edward I, he was very, very ambitious and very, very acquisitive. When we have Scottish visitors to our church, we can sit and talk about how much we dislike Edward I. Because Edward I, one of his many nicknames was the Hammer of the Scots, because he tried to conquer Scotland. He also tried to conquer Wales, and he waged wars with France. He was a very busy man. But from a Welsh perspective, he tried to conquer Wales and failed. But he left a very strong legacy behind him, because we have what's called the Ring of Steel, which are a series of castles that were built by Edward I as he progressed through Wales. Over to our left is Conwy Castle, which is probably the third to the last castle that he was able to build, and it's very, very impressive. But we're currently standing in St. Mary's Church, which at the time that Edward was here was Aberconwy Abbey. So what Edward did is, when he got to Conwy, this was a monastery, and Edward gave the monks money and asked them to leave. I do often wonder what would have happened if the monks had said, "No, thank you, we're quite happy." But probably wisely, they did leave. And they were probably here for 5 years while they built Conwy Castle and the town walls. So they completely enclosed the town in a high stone wall, which is still present.
And how tall are the walls that he built?
Probably 30 feet. They were the defence for the town. And once the walls were completed, it became an English town. The Welsh were not allowed inside the town walls. Welsh was not allowed to be spoken within the town walls, except for 2 days a year. And we still have those 2 days. In the spring, we have the Seed Fair, And in the autumn, we have the honey fair. And those were the 2 days when the Welsh were allowed to come in. So he was a great king for the English, but he was the oppressor of the Welsh.
So how long was his influence felt here?
Not for very long, because the Welsh were terrific guerrilla fighters. They didn't do pitched battles. He ran out of money because he was spending money on fighting the Scots, the Welsh and the French, and his purse wasn't bottomless.
So he was overextended.
Definitely, yes. He launched all these campaigns, but I don't believe he completed any of them. He never fully conquered Scotland, never fully conquered Wales, and the French, obviously, they beat him back.
During my visit with Alice Longshanks at Charing Cross, I told her about my chat with John Hibbs, the tour guide.
So the most important thing when we think about figures from history is to recognise them in the context of their own time. Edward I has a very, very bad reputation today, largely because of Braveheart.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing how effective these films can be at cementing certain views of historic figures or practices or whatever. But when you look at the medieval ideal of a great king, if you're English, he is a great king, and he is probably the best example of what a medieval king should be. He did all sorts of things, you know, he established Parliament. He brought a much wider group of people into Parliament to have a better representation of the country, I suppose. So we owe him that. And he went on crusades, which again was seen as a very worthy thing to be doing. But he grew up in a period of civil war where the crown was completely compromised. And so is it any surprise that he rules with a heavy hand to maintain the peace? But part of his rule is massively subduing the Welsh and the Scottish. Now, people at the time would say that was what was needed to happen. But of course, if you're Welsh or Scottish, you know, you wouldn't say that, and that's totally valid as well. But I think it's a much more mixed and nuanced picture than the black and white baddie we perceive Edward as.
Eleanor was about 49 years old when she died, and she was about a 200-mile journey from her home in London. I asked Alice if her death was unexpected.
Eleanor had been ill, we think, for about a year. It's very hard to know, but there are a few clues. People ordering certain medicines at certain points. She stopped some of the usual patterns of her behaviour. We can't be sure, but what is certain is that by November 1290, she is certainly ill. A diversion is made from Clipstone, where a parliament was being held, towards Lincoln, possibly to pray for Eleanor's health, I suppose, but she doesn't make it to Lincoln. The speed of their travel starts to really drop. She was able to travel for 20 miles a day, something like that. So suddenly she's only able to travel for a very, very short distance, which kind of indicates that she was in a very weak condition.
Would she have been riding or walking or in a carriage or
She would have travelled on a horse, which is quite amazing to think she might have been doing that when she was pregnant a lot of the time.
Oh, I can't imagine.
By late November 1290, what happens is the Queen is so ill, and they're about 6 miles from Lincoln, and there's this kind of little village, cluster of houses called Harby, and there's a manor house in the village. Probably it happened like this. The King's messenger knocking on the door, waking up the man who lived there, Sir Richard de Weston, with the terrible news, you know, Sir Richard, the Queen is nearby, she's gravely ill, we need somewhere for her to sleep. And suddenly, this sleepy household cleared out, and the Queen came and had to stay in Sir Richard's house, which is so ironic. You know, she spent all of this life living in all these palaces all around Europe, but then she ends up in this strange manor house nearby Lincoln. And over the following days, we've got all these records. People were going to Lincoln to get medicine, letters were sent to London and so forth. But eventually, she doesn't make it, and so she dies on the 28th of November, 1290. And you can go to the site today, it's behind this churchyard, and you can still see the earthworks of the manor house. It's just an empty field now, but it's quite amazing to think that that is the spot that Eleanor died. And then after that, her body was taken to Lincoln, and it was embalmed.
Okay.
So the innards, the intestines, all this kind of stuff, viscera, was what they call it, that was all taken out. That was buried in Lincoln Cathedral.
Oh.
And so,
Is that marked today?
yeah, so there's a visceral tomb. So an embalmed body was carried. And she was buried in 3 separate places. The viscera in Lincoln Cathedral, her heart buried in London at Blackfriars and her body at Westminster Abbey. And this was a common practice at the time.
Okay.
It
Seems kind of macabre, really.
It is. But, people were travelling across Europe all the time. So there's loads of accounts of either kings and queens being buried abroad or their bodies being sent back embalmed in these different ways.
Edward quickly announced that he would build 12 crosses in towns between Lincoln and London to memorialize the journey that her body had made. I asked Alice if she thought that the crosses were built for Edward's sake, or did he intend that people follow them as a pilgrimage, starting at Lincoln Cathedral and ending at Charing Cross or Westminster Abbey, where she was buried.
I think that it is a genuine kind of celebration of Edward's love for his beloved wife. He commissions these crosses within months, pretty soon after she dies, which makes me think it's a kind of knee-jerk reaction of grief, I suppose. They talk about modern men as being quite active in their grief. Mm-hmm. So whilst women might be, I suppose, more emotional and kind of passive and perhaps stay at home and not really know what to do with themselves, often men find projects, if you like. They'll want to do something and keep themselves busy. And of course, Edward is a classic example of that, in that he builds all these crosses or commissions them to be built. Why did he do it? It's interesting to consider when you think of all the options, because he could have built an amazing garden. He could have commissioned an incredible library. Eleanor loved reading. He could have built a chapel in a cathedral. There's so many things he could have done, and this is quite an unusual thing to do. Are these just monuments in these towns, or is it intended that people follow them as a pilgrimage route itself, starting at Lincoln Cathedral and ending at Westminster Abbey? And this is a period where people believed that you would go to purgatory after you died. Prayers would be said to speed up your time through purgatory. That's often why chapels were built in the medieval period. And so if that was a pilgrimage route, it would increase the number of prayers to be said for Eleanor. And if that is the case, which it could be, then it's very interesting because it changes each of these monuments, because you, as the visitor, you complete them because you are an active part of this route.
Alice decided that she herself would follow Eleanor's funeral cortege on foot, just like a medieval mourner might have done. The inspiration for this project came one day when Alice's time was completely consumed with thoughts about another queen.
Not long ago, as you know, Queen Elizabeth II passed away, and I took part in this incredible event. Everyone was invited to queue outside Westminster Hall in London.
And how long did that line get?
So it was this massive queue that would snake all the way around the city, all stretching out. I was there for about 10 hours on the Thursday, I think. It was the most trending thing in the UK that week, the queue. How long is the queue? So everyone was watching it. And what would happen is you'd go into Westminster Hall and you would be able to see the coffin of Queen Elizabeth II. And Westminster Hall is one of the oldest rooms in the country. It's got this incredible hammer beam timber roof, heavy big stone walls, but delicate wooden work, on the ceiling. This is the room where Charles I was put on trial for his execution. Leaders of the world have given speeches, and when politicians come, and they often hold an audience there. So this is a very historic room.
Yes.
And it was such a magical thing to be in that room with all those members of the public who were essentially mourners. And it made me think, this is like suddenly the ancient ways of the medieval world with pilgrimage and shrines. I was a part of that. I was fascinated by that happening. And we've had all these discussions in recent years. How do we remember Elizabeth II? Well, Edward I was very clear that he'd remember Eleanor through these series of monuments.
So Alice decided that she'd start in Harby, where Eleanor died, and work her way down to London, just as Eleanor's cortege had done. Her book chronicles lovely people she met along the way, and it documents her surprise and delight at the way Eleanor and Edward have touched ordinary lives. I don't think her book would have been the same if Alice hadn't been following the route on foot.
What is it about walking? You know, the pace of walking or the activity of it? I mean, what is it, do you think, that contributes, both in your case, to the pilgrimage experience and into the final book that you were able to write?
Well, I think walking is the natural human pace, right? I think that's a wonderful thing, that you know that you're doing the same thing. You're doing exactly the same actions people have done for hundreds or thousands of years. It's the same as what the Romans were doing. I was walking along Ermine Street, which is a major Roman road, and you just think there was loads of Romans doing exactly the same thing. And there have been people doing that in England for all those years since. But there is something else with walking, is that it does slow you down, and you do begin to notice a lot more things. If you're driving place to place, or even cycling, or even running, when you're walking, it forces you to notice things, and I think that's a really important part of it. And it gives you time for reflection. You know, it forces your mind to slow down as well.
The experience for Alice was a physical challenge. She wouldn't have considered herself a long-distance hiker before this. More than that, though, she gained some spiritual insight, an affirmation that the past is still with us. She talked to me about a mystical term, thin places.
It's where this world and another world, you know, whatever that might, the world that you might believe in, the heavenly world, if you like, the walls between it are thinner. So people describe it as when you get like a shiver, or you suddenly have a feeling of something being different in a space, and you often feel it in a church or a cathedral. It's all kind of up for grabs, what it means to different people. But I think that does ring true for me, and I felt at Harby, you know, the village where she had died. I felt it there. I felt something when I was standing on this spot in Trafalgar Square. And it's this little plaque on the ground, but it's in this kind of circular roundabout. It's a kind of empty space in some ways, but you've got all of these cars driving around you, and it's the central point of London. So it feels to me like everything is swirling around it. And I felt like a similar thing in the Geddington Cross. And I sat there, and I was there for about 2 days on the walk, and I remember sitting there and just watching the world of that village kind of unfurl. It was this strange thing. Oh, and when I was sitting there, I was talking to this little girl, and she was one of the girls in the village, and I was just chatting, and, you know, I think she's like 8 years old. And whilst I was sitting on the steps of the Eleanor Cross in Geddington, she told me her name, and it was Raina, which means queen.
Yeah.
I could not believe it. I mean, what are the chances of that?
Gives
and I was
me
sitting there with Eleanor.
a shiver.
Yeah, so there have been a few moments where I thought it was just amazing. I think it's the connection with history, and suddenly feeling like that connection is very much alive.
When the Constant Wonder team was in London, we decided we too could make a trek. Not on foot, unfortunately. We didn't have that kind of time, but we were so moved by some of the encounters Alice had had with people keeping Eleanor's story alive today. We went out to hear for ourselves about the closeness some moderns feel for this nearly 800-year-old queen. Along the way, we met a former rock musician, a Canadian transplant who's become one of the Queen's most ardent fans, and a social worker who immigrated to London from Uganda as a child. When Constant Wonder continues in just a moment, we'll find out how people as different as these are preserving Eleanor's legacy. I'm Tenery Taylor.
I'd like to introduce you to another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, The Lisa Show, hosted by comedian, believer, and single mother Lisa Valentine Clark. The Lisa Show delves into most any challenge that meets us in the course of our lives, especially challenges in the realm of human relationships, whether it's parenting, mental health questions, or social issues. Lisa and her council of moms are willing to tackle it. Figuring life out is vexing enough without losing an ability to laugh or cry together or just plain talk things through. The Lisa Show. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to Constant Wonder.
Only 3 of the original Eleanor crosses survive, and there's the Victorian replica, Charing Cross. Most of the crosses fell victim to the anti-papal, anti-royalist revolt in the English Civil War of the mid-1600s. The Constant Wonder team set out to see the one that is best preserved. Less than 2 hours from London is the village of Geddington, population 1,671. It once boasted a royal hunting lodge, so Eleanor and Edward would have been quite familiar with the place. The Eleanor Cross here is a 3-sided tower that tapers near the top, roses carved in relief into its lower half. It stands 43 feet tall today and features 3 statues of Eleanor, one per side, each under a Gothic gable. Now, it's at this same cross that Alice Longshanks met the young girl named Raina. This cross stands in the middle of the quiet intersection of 3 of the town's main roads. The town only has about 5 or 6 through streets in total. A block away is a medieval bridge that still takes residents in and out of the town.
It's still the same bridge built in 1250.
Tour guide Cam Cadell, who is based in Geddington. When the bridge was built, he believes that the town had about 700 residents, and the nearest towns were at about 1,000.
They've based all the stops based on what one day's travel was. And Geddington was 1 day's ride from every major location. So we were filled with pubs and bars and coaching inns because you couldn't get anywhere without stopping here. And so you were walking the same streets that Elizabeth I, Henry VIII, James I, Henry II, Richard Lionheart, all came to Geddington and stayed here. My backyard has got a massive stabling area with a big road for coaches to settle in.
Despite its small size, the town still embraces its large place in medieval history. We started our tour with Cam inside the medieval church of St. Mary Magdalene.
Edward requested that every one of the monuments, there'd be a full medieval service. We are the only place that still does the full medieval mass every year for Eleanor of Castile. We also
on the day that we think that she was here.
Yes.
Okay.
And we also have a memorial in the altar of the church. She walked this space, she and all the major figures in medieval history, people who created Parliament, who wrote Magna Carta, all would have knelt on this spot here.
You can tell by his accent that Cam is from North America. Quebec, Canada, to be precise. His family's been there for hundreds of years.
How did you end up in this little village of Geddington?
Well, I married a Brit who couldn't speak French. You need to have written French in order to work in Quebec. And I can speak English after a fashion. So I ended up here. But no, I would have followed her to Antarctica, but I had a degree in English history already.
Cam Cadell has retired from teaching and from being an activity therapist. But he is, as you can hear, still very much engaged in understanding history. Outside the thick-walled stone church stands the Eleanor Cross. This cross bears shields identifying Eleanor's royal heritage, English through her marriage, Castilian through her father, French through her mother. Literacy and education were important to Eleanor. She had her own scriptorium, which is essentially her own publishing house for the royal family's use. It's the only royal scriptorium we know of in Northern Europe at that time. She was also a great patron of scholars, and according to Cam, it can be argued that
she founded what became the libraries of Oxford and Cambridge. So this is one of the things that Eleanor gave.
Edward, as we saw at Charing Cross, wasn't shy about celebrating his wife's achievements. Even though some of the English were critical of, for instance, the way she had amassed so much property. Cam points out that the Eleanor Crosses could be seen as a rebuke to anyone who would criticize the recently departed Queen.
She is literally on a pedestal looking down the same 3 streets. This is a warrior king who rode into battle ahead of his men, and yet he wanted everyone to know how smart his wife was. This is because he felt England generally treated her like a bloody Spaniard who came here with her family to take our jobs. And instead, she made huge contributions to England. You didn't appreciate her, and I'm going to put billboards at every major crossroads to tell you. It is still looking down the same 3 streets, and it's not to ego, to war, to religion, to politics, like all monuments are. It is to love. And it may not be the Taj Mahal, but it is still hundreds and hundreds of years older than the Taj Mahal to enduring love.
Cam made a point of illustrating how Geddington was bypassed when the railway went through Kettering instead of his town.
If the railway had come to Geddington, we'd be 60,000 people. Instead, it went to two tiny little farming villages called Kettering and Corby, and everyone forgot this was the center of the Midlands.
But I wonder if the narrow medieval bridge that is still a main thoroughfare, the homes thatched in medieval-style roofs, and the Eleanor Cross in the center of it all, I wonder if all that might have gotten lost if the population had exploded. London transplant Penny Griffin describes why she likes living in Geddington so much. She is a licensed reader and lector for the church, and in the absence of the Reverend, she had opened up the building for us.
I have lived here for 36 years this summer. We came from London. It was just a wonderful opportunity to live in a place that has so much history. It's a very inclusive village and people were very kind to us, incomers. But the great thing is that we live right in the centre of the village where the cross is, where the Eleanor Cross is. And we didn't realise when we first arrived here what a privilege that was going to be. And here I am 36 years later, still every time I leave my front door being watched over by Queen Eleanor. Every time I go away, doesn't matter whether it's been for 4 weeks or 4 hours, I come back into the village and there she is waiting. And it's just, it sort of fills me with real pride to be part of that and so much part of history and feeling that there she is, a force for good.
London has lots of history, but what makes Geddington different?
I sense that the spirit of Eleanor, that love story that they had between them, Edward and Eleanor, I think we still feel it today. And I think that's what gives this village such a wonderful spirit and such a wonderful atmosphere. And also, of course, we are surrounded by the medieval stonework and this beautiful church.
Still worshiping in the same spot, walking the same roads laid out just like they were?
Absolutely, yes. This central part of the village, very much so. The medieval bridge. And it's just, as I say, it's a source of pride because when people come, they pick up on how we feel and how much we love living here and being part of this very special village.
I'm going to give the last word in Geddington to tour guide Cam Cadell. He spontaneously shared this bit from a poem he wrote.
The road still runs along the ridge, to bend for the village, the church and bridge. Evading Cromwell's moment's rage, perhaps protected by some mage, proof love endures beyond their age. The cross still stands in Geddington.
Love that so much. Who wrote that poem and what year?
We don't want to say that.
What? You wrote that?
Yes, it's got the music. It's a drums beat song. It's a marching song. We'll get her down, we'll get her down, we'll get her down to Geddington.
I'm using that. I am so using that.
Next, when a rock and roll musician decides to settle down, he chooses a place where the Edward-Eleanor love story is still the talk of the town, despite no Eleanor Cross in sight. That's coming right up on Constant Wonder. I'm Tenery Taylor.
The very best stories hinge on some dramatic tension, a conflict that protagonists work hard to resolve. BYU Radio has a new original podcast, and it gets right to the heart of life's classic conflicts and tensions. It's titled Conflict Coach with Dr. Emily Taylor. On this podcast, Taylor, who is a certified mediator, helps real people grapple with real disputes, be they at home or in the workplace or community. Each episode reveals strategies for finding root causes of conflict and then working toward healthy outcomes. Look for Conflict Coach with Dr. Emily Taylor on BYU Radio or wherever you get your podcasts.
Whom living we dearly cherished, and whom in death we cannot cease to love.
Words attributed to Edward I as he ordered the Eleanor Crosses to be built. The market town of Stony Stratford, or Stony as the locals call it, is just 30 miles south of Geddington, population just under 8,000. It's here that those words from Edward are ribboned atop a 3-story mural of Eleanor. This town once had an Eleanor cross, but it's long gone, and the locals can't agree on where it ever stood exactly. But as of 2019, Stony has had a striking mural of Eleanor, monumental in its own way. The mural could be described as pop culture iconography of a medieval queen, a dark-haired beauty against a rusty red background, looking up and away at the sky, encircled by birds. A heron at each elbow, who seem to be shielding her with their outstretched wings. A tangle of pink and white roses around her skirts. It's gorgeous and arresting, especially when you come upon it for the first time. The artist is Luke McDonnell.
She looks iconic in the way of like a religious painting.
Right.
Was that intentional?
It was inspired by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who was a pre-Raphaelite artist who I've admired ever since I was a kid. My mum always used to have paintings up on the wall. They always had this beautiful, like, longing look about them. So it's got this grandeur about it. It's like really ecclesiastic. I've always like loved.
Well, you've kind of
religious.
made a halo around her.
That was the idea. Yeah, but a real modern day, like contemporary graphic one.
In Luke's depiction, Eleanor is holding her hands upright in front of her chest as if she's just about to pray. And the 2 herons are joined by a 3rd bird, which represents peace and prosperity.
This kingfisher and the 2 herons, so there's an awful lot of wildlife around. There's a beautiful river that runs all around Stony, which I used to walk every day. So you'd see herons, and if you were really lucky, a kingfisher. I had this plaque made, which pulls apart all the individual things. It's all well and good me understanding it, but to communicate it to, the locals and anyone that travels here, I wanted to be really crystal clear with what I was trying to communicate.
Artist Luke didn't grow up in Stony Stratford, and he didn't start his career as an artist. I got his backstory over lunch at the Bull and Brew pub just down the street from the mural.
I did music for about 25 years.
Rock and roll.
And rock and roll, and I toured the world, and I wrote, did a bunch of albums.
As a singer or
Drummer.
A drummer.
Yeah, it was amazing. And as fun as rock and roll was, it didn't pay the bills. Not as much as I needed it to anyway. So I took on what I was always good at, since being a kid, which was artwork.
At this point, Luke was living in the town next door called Wolverton. He lived above a pub and...
To pay my rent, I was producing murals for them. If the bands that were coming in or...
So you'd be constantly refreshing these, redoing the murals.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
wow.
It was a really dark place, like really grungy. So it was like big black walls. Every other week I'd come up with the roller and I'd roll over the paintings and then I'd produce a new one. And before I knew it, word got round and I made a real name for myself. The business it took me. I didn't intend on building it. It just sort of dragged me with it.
It was about this time that Luke felt like it was time for a change.
After living in this venue, I've got to that point in my life where I want to start a family. I'd always heard that Stony was like the jewel of Milton Keynes. So I thought maybe I could leave my grungy roots and go and find somewhere nicer. I fell in love with Stony the moment I first visited. As soon as I moved here, I was asking lots of questions about the town and the buildings. What are all the local stories? And this place is magic. It is absolutely rammed full of like wonderful anecdotal history stories. And all the local pubs, people are sharing stories. And Eleanor was one of the biggest. That was the one that everyone was chatting about. And as I dug a little bit deeper, I found out a bit more about Eleanor's personality or supposed personality, but she was kind, she was giving to the people, which is a little bit,
it didn't fit
polarized, to what you'd expect.
The mold, it didn't fit the mold of a powerful queen.
Yeah, of that age, and all the nobility, you heard a lot about some of the terrors and the darker stuff. So anyway, it was wonderful to hear about her and the love that she had between her and Edward I. He was besotted with her, by all accounts. And it was just really moving.
Luke decided that he wanted to memorialize Eleanor. not in stone, but in his own medium, an outdoor mural right in the center of town.
This one was hard to get through, so it was me that pushed for it.
Were you getting paid?
A bit.
Okay.
Not properly. But it didn't matter. I wanted to do it.
Right.
I went to so many dull council meetings trying to break through the red tape to get it done. But I'm proud of myself. I did it. And I found a wall, and I went to the landlord and had to twist his arm as well. But, as soon as people got the idea and they understood it, they got behind it. The message of love and how universal that is, Jesus, all the best pop songs, right? It's all about love. And, that meaning resonated. Mm-hmm. And still does to this day, I still get messages from people, and I get shop owners and, guys up and down the high street saying thank you, because it brings people from around the world, tourists and all sorts, who end up, going and spending money in all the local shops. Because, it's a joyous message, and, it's a wonderful piece of history.
So it's a beautiful quote that you frame the mural with from Edward I about his love and devotion to her. But do you think that people are resonating to that quote even outside of love stories?
Yeah, absolutely. It's relatable, right? And it's about connectivity, which is all we crave, right, as humans.
From Charing Cross to Geddington to Stony, connection is the theme I kept hearing. The theme that has kept the story of Eleanor relevant in the lives of such different people. And so, given that Luke was painting this monument to love and connection, this next story from him shocked and saddened me. We were out on the street in front of the mural. We had talked about Rossetti and the local birds incorporated into the painting. I asked Luke a simple question about his choice of flowers.
I'm going to have to open up and be a bit, just big dose of honesty here. So I spent 14 days on this mural with a tiny little brush. And it took a really, really long time. I mean, you can see the intricacy in some of the parts of
Especially,
her robe.
Yeah, the trim on her robe, which looks like gold embroidered thread in, floral and geometric patterns, yeah.
By the time I got to the flowers, it was right at the end, and I was due to go and meet my partner at the time in San Francisco, and I just found out that she'd been unfaithful.
And you're painting this tribute to love.
So exactly. So I'm just there, like, heartbreaking at the time, trying to represent the good side of love. And trying to communicate that message. And I'll be honest, I got to the point where it was just like, I can't continue anymore. So the flowers between us and your podcast, it's not finished. And they're supposed to be English roses. Mm-hmm. And muddled in there, again, you can see sort of not complete, particularly towards the top here, were some flowers that reportedly Eleanor loved herself because she was keen on gardening. I never managed to finish it.
Are you tempted to go back?
I am. I spoke to the council a little while ago, because now I've learned all these new techniques, particularly with a spray can. You can get these absolutely gorgeous gradients and shapes, and I've taught myself this whole new technique, and I thought, like, if I come back at it now, I could make this look stunning.
It's already stunning.
I think she needs some love, as I say. She's sort of very desaturated now. She's lost her pop of colour, so I'd love to come back and give the whole thing a new lease of life, or perhaps even design them a new one. I don't know, but
could you do that?
Yeah.
I guess you do that. That's what muralists do, is they paint over and paint over.
Yeah.
It's kind of...
Art is ephemeral, as is life.
That's a little hard for me to wrap my mind around, your willingness to do that.
Yeah, well, it served its purpose. I got more magic out of this than I ever expected, in terms of people's reactions and what it's done for the town. So, yeah, I'm up for a new one.
That was muralist Luke McDonnell. And in the spirit of fresh starts and new adventures, I'm pleased to report that only a few months after that painful betrayal while he was painting the mural, Luke met the woman who is now his wife. They had 3 children in quick succession, so he's now living that family life he'd hoped to establish in Stony Stratford. Before we leave the story of Eleanor and Edward, I want to make one more stop. Back to the Charing Cross station. In 1979, the artist David Gentleman installed black and white cartoon murals on the platforms of the Northern Line in the London Underground there. The murals depict medieval craftsmen building the original Eleanor cross at this site. Stonemasons, carpenters, surveyors, blacksmiths, also women gathering stones, harvesting wheat to feed the workers, children, dogs. Every creature seems to be contributing to the moment when the Eleanor statues are hoisted into position. The artist made nearly 50 woodcut engravings, which he then enlarged and screen printed onto melamine, which was curved to fit the walls of the tube platform. It pulled me right back in time. You know the way you feel like you're right in the middle of the action when you're looking at a Richard Scarry picture book? It has that kind of energy.
Do you take this line often?
Yes.
Do you ever stop and look at the mural?
No, not actually. It's always in a rush. So if I have like a minute or two, yes. But other than that, not really. I've never kind of looked into it, what it is, what it mean, you know, what the meaning is, or anything like that. It's just, something on the wall.
Do you ever stop and look at the mural?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about it?
It obviously goes back to the very relatable old history of Charing Cross. So, it's pretty cool.
It depicts the workers who built the cross. Do you ever think about them?
Not at all, to be quite honest.
Do you ever look at the mural that's behind you?
I just sort of come here and get straight on the train.
And that's how it went for about 25 minutes. Most people we talked to never took the time to really reflect on the bustling scene on the wall. But then we met Patricia Yiga. She's what we'd call in the U.S. a social worker, someone who advocates for and works with special needs children. Her family immigrated to the U.K. from Uganda.
I've been using this stock for years and years and years.
And do you ever stop and look at the mural?
Oh, all the time, because I think this has been around for quite a while.
Since 1979.
Now. Yeah, exactly. And I've been in this country, since I was 5 years old, and I'm 44 now. And I just absolutely love it. Even my daughters love it as well.
Tell me what you love about it.
I think it's the attention to detail, but also additionally, just how, when you're so quick to move between stations, how it tells a story. And that's what I love about it. Yeah.
And tell me about maybe who some of your favorite figures are.
I think it would have to be the ladies. Maybe I'm biased a little bit.
Okay,
yeah,
that's fair.
I'm a little bit biased because I love the fact that you've got, some really strong women building something like that, and that sort of resonates with me.
Okay.
So that's what I love about it.
What do your children love about it?
I think for my children, they just love, I think it's the black and white because it stands out. That's one. But also additionally, what they love about it, again, it's all the different little characters. They're all doing different activities in the background. Like you see that other little man behind you there. He's carrying something. Like everyone plays a part in this particular mural. And I love that. Yeah.
We'd like to thank everyone in this episode for their parts in bringing us the story of the Eleanor crosses. Along with Patricia Yiga and the other London commuters, we heard from artist Luke McDonnell, Cam Cadell of Cam Tours, church lector Penny Griffin, tour guide John Gibbs, and historian Alice Loxton, author of Eleanor, a 200-mile walk in search of England's lost queen. This episode was produced by me with help from Haley Harris and Jess Scoville. On-site audio engineers were Clark Jackman and Trent Reimschussel. Studio sound design by Gabriel Harrow. Sometimes we get a story that seems to not quite fit the episode, but we can't bear to leave it on the cutting room floor. And here's one of those. While it's not about Eleanor, it is about history, Luke McDonnell's family history, and it's about connection between strangers. You'll remember how keenly Luke expressed his view that we all crave connectivity. This story came about totally unsolicited when we were at lunch with Luke in Stony Stratford.
I've always been a bit of a history buff. I think it comes from my grandfather. He was obsessed and constantly telling us stories. Before we go to bed at night, he'd regale some piece of history, normally like something from Viking era, Nordic or something like that. But yeah, English history he was so into. I've very rarely shared this, but it's funny. I was looking at the front of your business card here and looking at constant wonder, and it actually that's what I've been in ever since this thing happened to me. I've been in constant wonder. I don't understand what happened. But anyway, I'll try and explain quite simply. This is my grandfather. He was a really inspiring guy, and he was exceptionally artistic himself. A number of years back, he got cancer, and he was told that he was going to pass away. So before he did, we tried our best to do a number of projects together. He wrote a book, and I illustrated it, and it got quite tense, which I'm sure again is relatable for people that have been in a similar situation. I was spending a lot of time with him trying to get these books right, and his head, he just wasn't the same person. He was changing quite a lot,
And quickly, it sounds
was
like.
having it's awful way with him. And some friends basically invited me to go on this little expedition to Finland up through the Arctic Circle. And I was like, well, Granddad's still okay at the moment. I think I really need this break. I'm going to take it.
How old were you at this time?
It wasn't that long ago, so early 30s, I would guess. And I went up there and I thought, I'll come back fresh, new energy, whatever. And we travelled all the way up. We had a couple of really crazy little adventures in these like beautiful huts, with no running water, no electricity, freezing cold. It was really like Ice Age stuff. And then I got this phone call basically saying, he's going now. You need to come back. So I was, obviously I was incredibly upset and whatever. And I was like, right, I've just got to get my head in gear. I've got to find my way back to the airport and go and see him. Now, as I did, I ended up in this tiny little village on the way down. And I was walking through the streets, just sort of trying to get my head around it, trying to bite my lip a little bit because I had, my two friends with me. I didn't want to be too overly emotional. And all of a sudden, I was walking down the street and a woman, she must have been in her 60s, 70s, just took a sort of beeline for me across the street. And she walked straight up and she looked me in the eye and she put her hand on my chest and she said, "Your grandfather, he speaks through me. You need to finish the notes." So I had this big pile of notes back at home that I was working through with this book that we were doing together. You need to complete the notes. Something else in this sort of garbled pidgin English that I couldn't quite understand. And then she just walked away and I was just like, my friends were here. They were witnesses to this. We all had our jaws on the floor, like, what is going on? And I was like, I can't just let that go. So I chased her up the street and I got her back and said, so what is this? What's going on here? This feels like a setup, even though that was impossible. And she turned to me and she says, "I just want to be normal," and then walked away. I didn't know what to do. I went off to the closest little restaurant and I pulled out a napkin and I sketched her face. And in my head, I was like, I'm coming back here with a documentary team and I'm going to find this woman. I'm going to figure out what on earth is going on. But anyway, I got back home. I got to say goodbye to my grandfather, who then, ultimately passed away. His wish was for me to finish the book, to finish the notes, apparently, through this woman, which I did. And then on the day of his funeral, the book landed on my doorstep through the post, and I put it on his coffin. And to this day, I've still no idea
Who she is.
Who she is, what it was about, how it happened. And I spoke to so many people, my friends included, my mother, and so many of them have just been like, it's just, you got to let it go. It's one of those things. I'm like, are you mad? Like, surely you want to find out. And that's built into all of us, like this investigation and discovery and understanding. But yeah, everyone was kind of like, whoa, I don't know how to deal with that. So it was left. So I'm in constant wonder.
Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.